Bally 1994 World Cup Soccer, Bally Williams. Guys complaining of game resets during play. First thing when I turn it on, see this vertical line to the display? That, and hear that too? That's that popper, I believe, that's going. So that means that probably has an optic problem there. And then, of course, that line through the middle, which we're not seeing. Well, here, let me put it in the test. There's that line. That is almost always a problem with memory. If I go into, let's see, where is it? Display test. And you kind of fast forward through this. And then let it do all its little display tests. There, right there. It's a page error. So what that means is on the dot controller board, the RAM is usually bad, which is this chip with the big sticker over it. Put this over here. This guy right there is usually bad, so we'll probably replace that. But let's look at his flipper problem here. I've just got it in test mode. I'm going to close the coin door. Just hit the flipper buttons. See if I can get, yeah, look, it reset. Look at that. So then, yeah, it's going through resetting. So that was the main complaint that he was having. So let's see what the reset thing is all about here. Got my meter set on DC volts, and let's check for the 5 volts at TP2 on the driver board, and we have 5.06, which is really nice. But then let's go over to the CPU board on this little cap right here on the lower lead. Let's check. See, now it's 487. So that means that there's a voltage drop across these connectors. This is the connector out, the 5 volt connector coming out of the driver board, and this is the 5 volt connector going into the CPU board. So let's try resetting this guy a little bit, wiggle him around, push him back in, check the voltage again, and look at that. It has come up to 502. And then we'll do the same thing with this one. And that one didn't change. It's still 502. So this connector is probably good, but this connector is definitely not good. So the bottom line is that reset problems aren't always bridge rectifier BR2 and its associated filter cap, which, by the way, it looks like it's been replaced, because notice these two are different styles. So somebody's been down that road before. And look, they've also replaced this cap too. So somebody did some standard reset things, but they missed this connector issue, which is a big deal on these games. So, and this was easy to test with just a multimeter. Didn't have to replace anything to see exactly what the problem was. So we're going to replace this with a new crimp style connector instead of these IDC insulation displacement connectors. Desoldering the RAM chip from this dot matrix controller board. I had a problem with my desoldering pump, the Hanko 808. Here, listen to it. Hear that? That's what it's supposed to sound like. So a lot of times these things get jammed. Here I removed the collector tube out. Now, if I put my finger over this end here, listen to it. Hear that high RPM sound? That means that this filter right here, which is a little cotton filter, has gotten clogged. This is real common. And, you know, they give you replacements, but a lot of times if you're in the field, you can kind of scrape the old crap off to get to a new layer. Because when you're done, believe me, that's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to replace it. But you want to always get that sound. After every use, you want to use this little thing that came with it and clean the tip every use. So you always want to clean the collector, and you always want to do that to the tip for good longevity on this thing. Anyways, I desoldered it. You can see pretty good, and if you did things right, you should be able to just tap it and your part should come out. Here, I hear it. Chip fell out. Get nice clean desoldering holes there. New socket in. I use these dual solder tail styles. I do not like machine pin sockets. A lot of guys use them, but I think they're a crutch. The only useful part is if you've got plated through holes or traces that need repaired, or the plating that goes through the board, which is known as a plated through hole, is done. You can solder for both the top and the bottom, but they have really terrible, machine pin sockets have terrible retention rate, which means as your chip goes in, it actually cuts the side of the round hole, so you're like putting a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't have good contact surface area, and after a couple removals and insertions, the pins are essentially worn out and the socket's useless. Solder tails are much better. They have much better reliability as far as I'm concerned, but they don't allow you to solder on the top side. That was the only disadvantage to them. But if you're doing things right and not screwing things up when you desolder, you shouldn't need that. I ended up replacing both of the connectors. Note this one housing right there is a little yellow. Doesn't matter. It's getting new pins. The housing itself is just a plastic thing to hold the pins in place. The important part is the pins. So I replace them with these lovely trifurcon pins, as seen right there. These are the old IDC insulation displacement ones that I've replaced. So now we should be good to rock and roll. And the reason I replaced both of them is I figured since one had failed, this one had failed, how far behind could that one be? So just to be safe, replaced them both. And now we can try the game. I also have our board back in with our new 6264 RAM chip in there to see if it solved that problem, the line on the dot matrix problem. Game powered on with my two new connectors. Let's do a voltage check. Again, let's go up to TP2 to get a reference, and we get 5.07. And we go over to the CPU board on the bottom side of this capacitor, and look, we're at 5.04 now. So 5.04, there's very little voltage drop across these two replaced connectors. That's about the best you can hope for. 0.03 volts, it's pretty normal. 0.02, 0.03, 0.04, somewhere in there. Let's look at our display, and we can see we no longer have that line that was vertically down the middle. In fact, if we open the clone door, oops. See, let it go to the page. See, now it's testing the page memory, and we're not getting any errors. And we don't have that vertical line again, too. So the new RAM chip, RAM test okay. You see, we're okay now. So that new RAM chip fixed that problem. So we've got one thing left, and that's, well, maybe not. Oh, there we go. Hear it? That thing. We still got a problem with that we got to fix. To show this problem, if I take a ball, if I drop it into that vertical up kicker, it should immediately, even in just attract mode, it should immediately throw the ball up. So I stick it in there, and you see it's not kicking the ball up, which means that optic switch in there has failed, or something has failed to cause it to not work, because it should see the ball in there, even in attract mode, it should be kicking that ball straight up and out. And that was when we turn the game on. That repeated kicking means that it sees that switch like there's a ball stuck in there, and that's what you keep hearing, that popping. I'll give it to us now, but hear it? That's because that optic switch for that vertical up kicker has failed. So I have the game in switch test T1 and the playfield up. I've removed this popper, and I'm using a regular mag light, not an LED, but an old school mag light. Okay, and if you see, I've got the receiver optic on this side, and over here the transmitter. Yeah, not so much, blocking it here. But if I use my flashlight, it's working real consistently. So I would say that there's a problem with the transmitter. Yeah, definitely a transmitter problem, because the receiver seems to be working fine. So I think what we're going to do is replace the optic for the transmitter, and that should fix the popper problem. Not sure how this ever worked, seeing how the optic was completely missing. Somebody has molested this board, the solder on it, and you can just tell it's been reworked. What the hell if it was missing? How did this game ever work? New optic in that up kicker, because one was missing. Now let's boot it up, and notice I'm not going to even put it in switch test. Okay, we're not hearing this thing flipping. Like before, I remember it was constantly popping, so that means the switch is probably working, but the real test is take a ball, put it in there. And again, it's in a track mode. That's how it should react. So now we know the switch is working. I think we got everything covered on this game. All right, let's try a game. This is for the flipper test. No reset there. Game's working well. We can put it in there again. See that guy's working. So, looks like we're in pretty good shape here. So, we got ourselves a good working. World Cup Soccer.